How do you make sure that your company can keep running given a whole range of possible scenarios?
Some people are saying, listen to your insurers.
There's something about our ability to work more flexibly.
There's threats all over for businesses that aren't keeping their eyes on the horizon.
You've got to think about your business model and make sure that that is robust enough against various different challenges. Here we are again.
You asked for a dad joke.
I asked for a dad joke and you told me you weren't going to give me a dad joke.
Gone one better, but show and tell. So we can go two routes, but both of which would potentially link into our subject today.
Oh, really?
Which should be revealed if you have. Well, I say that people probably read the title.
No great reveal on that.
Great. So we can either talk about my new found energy bar, which is made with locusts, or my gift that I was given today, which is a pack of Russian tank recognition cards.
Goodness.
We'll save those for later. Coming up, folks.
You told me about those earlier. I just couldn't believe that you managed to come upon a pack of... someone's throwing things at us. A pack of Russian tank identification cards.
Yes, I was handed them surreptitiously through a car window this morning.
Were you?
By my contact.
Tell me about the locust bar.
The locust bar. So these, do you want to try some?
I wouldn't mind trying some. Some. I'll be brave.
They might have traces of almonds in. I just would say that.
Oh dear, that's not good for me. But we'll give it a go.
Give it a go. So
you got the ambulance on standby.
There you go.
Oh, it's even pre-broken.
I pre-broke it.
Hang on, I got the big bit. I don't want a whole big bit, especially not if it's going to send me into anaphylactic shock.
So a friend of mine is based.
This is it. I'm live on air. I'm going to eat a locust bar.
So a friend of mine based in Israel he has a company where he's connecting ancient biblical foods with modern technology. So he's growing locusts, which apparently are very high in protein.
How many ancient biblical foods are there?
Well,
apart from manna.
Manna.
And locusts.
Well, locusts, there's, I say that locust is just mentioned
bread
in the Bible quite a few times about, John the Baptist ate a lot of locusts. So apparently he's bringing it back. And it's full of protein. So he's got this huge
It's quite
factory.
chewy. It's like dates.
Yeah, so it's medjool dates and locust.
Oh, I see.
So it's not all locust, no. It's medjool dates and cashew and 2% locust. So I thought...
2% locust?
I know. I was hoping for more.
I was going to say 2%.
So he does
like
actually,
pepper on
but
the
he
top.
does sell the actual locust, so you can buy the locust on its own.
Can you get a deep fried locust? Locust on toast?
Locust on toast. Wow, probably a bit crunchy, wouldn't it? Bit like
Post-locust.
popcorn, like a crunchy popcorn thing.
Yeah.
But I thought they're pretty good. Bit of lotus. I mean, I won't.
Nice.
It's shipping. Turns out the shipping from Israel is quite expensive. So, but other than that, I thought I quite liked it. Tasty.
So have you
get my
got
kids to eat it.
a garage full of them?
No, I just ordered 2 boxes.
Thing is, with just two... anyway. Mind boggles. Back to the tanks. Better at recognising Russian tanks than recognising locusts in cereal bars.
If you want locust-enabled, protein-enabled energy bars.
We could combine those ideas and put Russian tank identification images on the back of locust bar wrappers.
Well, I think they both do fit what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Survival.
This is an apocryphal build-up to our podcast for today. Shall we actually do it?
We shall do it.
Reveal what everybody knows anyway, which is what today's is about. Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow, where we try and come up with something useful or interesting, sometimes a little bit humorous, for owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises, or as we discussed last week, small and medium-sized businesses. Hi Rich, you're with us again.
Here we are.
We need to get some guests on, just to mix it up a bit. People are getting bored of the both of us. And here we are on episode 112.
112,
Now, last week when I announced that it was episode 111, I gave you a fun fact.
Oh, yeah.
About the 111, the superstition in cricket, about standing on one leg. Remember all that business called a Nelson?
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about it, so I did research it. And it's attributed to an umpire called David Shepherd who came up with the idea of it. And they say it was called the Nelson because they say he had one eye, one arm, and one leg, which is not true because he had 2 legs.
Right.
But he would only have one arm, one eye. And it was considered to be a precursor of someone getting out because 111 looks like the wickets in cricket.
Okay.
So fun fact for 112.
Yeah, oh, here we go. I sense a trend.
Can you see where I'm going with this one? The only global emergency telephone number.
No, really?
Didn't know that, eh? You think maybe 911, the American one? Clearly not 999, which is only used in the UK, Hong Kong and Malaysia. That's it. 112 is recognised all over the world, whatever the country is. Do you know what the emergency number is in Australia? Your family are in Australia? You should know this.
No idea.
If you are visiting your parents and someone has a heart attack, what number do you dial?
111.
No, that is New Zealand.
Ah, there you go.
So there's a clue there, because that's not the number for Australia,
That's the number.
which is 000.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and I just can't think, did they all just try and deliberately come up with something different? Back in 1937, we had the 999 thing in the UK, because apparently it was easy to dial in the dark in an emergency.
If anyone's wondering if they've tuned into the right podcast,
Yeah, you're true. We'll move on then from anecdotes about 112.
anecdotes about emergency. Maybe we'll save that for another podcast.
So
Bonus
wherever you are in the
episode.
world, you can do 112. So anyway, more importantly, tell us about our Nelson episode, 111. What was that?
111. So 111 was about how to build great customer experiences.
Yeah, CX.
CX.
What came before that?
110 was the differences in selling for large companies and small companies. So we had a bit of discussion about that.
Yeah.
And then 109 was a kind of précis of our recruitment process.
Yes, recruitment.
Things that employers should be thinking about maybe when it comes to recruiting.
Now, last week you lamented the fact that you are no longer able to say dirty data.
Dirty data.
And so I've given you the chance there to say it, but the opportunities will diminish. But I did say, as a bonus, acknowledging the fact that you have these nostalgic moments in the past, I said I'd give you a bonus random choice of any episode in the past that you can mention to add to the list of the last three.
So I picked episode 40.
And off the top of my head, I can't remember which one that was.
So episode 40 was, should SMEs use generative AI and CGI to tell their brand story? And that was the one where we covered ourselves in AI garb, and you were the robot and I was the alien, and we CGI'd ourselves doing this podcast. So that's one to watch on YouTube, episode 40.
That's a bit more visual.
Bit more visual.
Go and see that.
But we were ahead of our time, because everyone's doing it now.
Episode 40, that was like ages ago.
We were well ahead of our
We
time.
were so ahead of our time. I bet they hadn't even released ChatGPT by then.
No,
Probably
it was
just
just before it, I think.
Maybe. Okay, so there's some previous episodes for people to tune into if they think they don't want to hear about emergency numbers. They go and listen to something more interesting instead. No, seriously though, this has got a significance, this episode, because it's going out as close as we can get it to the 5th anniversary of the UK going into a national lockdown because of Covid-19. Remember Boris Johnson? Quite a surreal moment, really. We're all sat there at home. Boris Johnson comes on the telly and says, stay home.
I was already in whatever it was, isolation or something. Well, had nothing to do with the lockdown.
You were just
I just had enough.
A bit reclusive.
No, we had a bit of a cough and stuff, didn't we?
Yeah,
So we did our duty.
Are you isolated?
We isolated.
So it's hard to imagine what things were like back then, but I was, in preparation for this, just thinking back through the various clients that we were helping at the time. And we were having daily board meetings with lots of different clients. We had to stagger them all through the day. And there was this sort of sense of controlled panic. That no one really knew what was happening, but there was some solace in at least meeting together with all your colleagues who also didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
But at least we could talk about the fact that we knew nothing was happening. And then things like the furlough scheme was announced, for a new thing.
Well, I think in fairness, there was a lot of ambiguity, wasn't there, around everything, and no one quite knew. It was moving feast, and so we sort of were used as a bit of a conduit, because we was obviously talking to a lot of different companies.
Yeah, sharing best practice.
So
and we were keeping our eye on the government website for announcements and disseminating that. All the time that the companies we were working with were just trying to deal with how on earth do you cope with hundreds of employees that need to come to work, but you've got to keep them 2 meters apart and make them wear masks and all this sort of business. So it was a challenging time. And I thought, what better opportunity really, just to have a bit of a reflection, not to necessarily relive those days, because that's maybe etched on everyone's memories, but just almost acknowledging the fact that we have quite short memories anyway, and especially in business, and it's easy to forget some of the lessons of the past, and we've just gone on. And it could well be that some companies have slipped back into a position of being quite vulnerable now, if not necessarily that exact thing happens again, but some other disaster or emergency befalls us, and you need to have some sort of recovery plan. So we thought we'd go through some of those.
it's very brave, because under this cool, calm exterior is a raging conspiracy theorist just waiting to leap out. So I'll do my best to
You think you can control yourself?
Keep it on point.
Well, maybe I should tap into that that skill you have there. If you were to bring all of your conspiracy theory powers to bear, what would be the most likely next disaster to befall us?
Ooh. Well, was it a test run? Was COVID a test run? Here we go.
Okay, right.
But no, reining in my conspiratorial theories, one thing that came out, so the fires that they had in California, one lesson that I learned from that was some people were saying, listen to your insurers. Have a look at your insurers, because the insurance company stopped insuring those houses and properties in that area 12, 18 months beforehand, because they had people on the ground that could see that fire departments and wildfire stuff was being defunded and fire hydrants didn't have water, and they knew, and that's one of the reasons why they stopped doing it. So, and that kind of stuck with me.
And did that come true then? Is that?
Yeah, I think
they were saying there were
of
stories about the fact that the fire hydrants didn't have any water in them and stuff.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
And they knew
that was a big problem. And so but whether or not that was true, I thought, well, actually that's quite interesting, right? Because insurers, their whole job is risk. What are they looking at? They're clearly got people on the ground as well as just people in suits.
So you work on the basis, if they're prepared to insure you, it's not likely to happen.
Yeah.
And if it is likely to happen, they won't insure you.
They won't insure you, yeah.
So just look at all the stuff they won't insure you for.
So last week we got our insurance renewal through.
We did.
And one of the things that has now been taken out of our insurance, and this would be interesting for the people to check if you're this, is we are no longer covered should munitions fall on our building.
Now, that's not just a clerical tidying up, is it? How do you come up with that?
Which leads me to my pack of recognition cards for Russian tanks.
There's a link.
So
you think they might be rolling over the Hormond Hill over the Wrekin?
But it was interesting that that's all of a sudden.
I know, it's weird,
with
isn't it?
Recent events and everything been excluded from
They've
insurance
also
policy.
taken out our flood cover, even though we've never been flooded. But they obviously feel that the way things are going, we might be.
Yeah.
So, it's a good point to look at your insurance cover.
It's worth having a look at your insurance cover and just see what sort of things are they. And also the other thing that I think was and it's always quite hard sometimes, isn't it, reading the...
comparing them side by side.
Comparing them and just understanding the lingo in it all. But I'm pretty sure they've taken out cover as well for if we have an incident that happens physically in the building as a result of a cyber attack.
Oh, so physically you mean someone comes in?
No, so imagine you've got... So there's been a lot of talk about this as well with all these Wi-Fi plugs that we've now got in our houses and robot vacuum cleaners and all this kind of stuff. Because there's a lot of software developed in certain countries that maybe have hostile...
Could they be listening in on our phones as we speak?
It could be listening to this podcast for all we know.
Well, you'd have to be pretty high tech to get through the various defences.
So, but there's... imagine someone hacked your Wi-Fi plug that's got the heater on it or something, and just turn the heater on all night till it melts down and burns the building down.
And you're not covered for that?
I don't think we're covered for that anymore.
Ooh.
So...
Okay.
So...
some lessons to be learned there then.
But fear not, listener.
Okay, I'm now starting to regret asking you about conspiracy theory stuff. But suddenly come out of it was a really useful bit of a tip there for business owners and managers about checking their insurance cover. And as we know from bitter experience, one of our clients had a terrible, terrible fire in their business that they turned out they weren't covered for, because one of the small print conditions was that they had to do something every day to do with a waste facility or something, and they hadn't followed that to the letter of the law, and they therefore weren't covered. Business went bust. Very, very sad.
Yeah.
Okay, so we put together a bit of a short list-ish of the sorts of things. Now, bearing in mind, we're not trying to say if we have another COVID pandemic-style lockdown, because, well, I suppose we could think about what that might look like. I can't imagine, personally, they'll go into lockdown again, but they might. You don't know, depending on what it is and how fatal it is for different age groups and all that. I'd like to think they find a different way of dealing with it. But nevertheless, there's something about our ability to work more flexibly, whether it's hybrid, remote working, or whatever it is. We need to, even that, and that covers for whether munitions fall on your factory or whether you've got a flood or all sorts of things. Power cut. In fact, we had to do it a week or two ago because we had demolition works nearby that accidentally took out a BT cabinet. So even though we still had power, we didn't have any internet. So we would like to go and work from home and from coffee shops and so on. So these sort of things can happen. Thankfully, we're a lot more prepared for that now anyway, aren't we? Yep. Remember back at the COVID, people didn't have webcams. It was not easy to, and because Zoom,
Well,
no one had really heard of Zoom.
Yeah, the technology was there, wasn't it? It was kind of,
Yeah, we just
it
weren't
was
used
there,
to using
people
it.
just weren't using it. And
Yeah.
then it accelerated. It was the catalyst to accelerate that sort of...
It's almost gone so
hybrid
far now.
working.
I was on a meeting the other day where some people were in it face to face for the first time in a long time because they're so used to being on remote. They said, "Oh, I can't cope with this office working. I get a lot more done at home." There you go. So I think from that point of view, that's the biggest lesson that we've already learned, and I can't imagine the clock being turned back on that. Really, we're all used to having laptops, working from home, working remotely if we need to. But one of the consequences of that, sort of related to that, is your supply chain may not be as well sorted as you, not necessarily not prepared to, but just not able to for, if they need a physical presence. Yeah. So a big lesson that came out of it was having at least a bit of diversity in your supply chain. Don't rely on just one source. And as a lot of companies found that were relying on China for supply, when that was in lockdown before us, they were stuck, weren't they? Remember the chip shortage in the cars and all sort of business?
Well, interesting article. I don't know if you saw it in the paper earlier this week around the amount of rare earth metals, which apparently rare earth metals aren't actually that rare.
Right, they're just rarer than other metals.
Than soil. But there's an awful lot apparently in the UK, and they're talking about whether or not there's a kind of resurgence of. Apparently, the last geological survey in the UK was done in the 1950s.
Really? Wow.
And we're sitting on quite a few, lithium in Cornwall and loads of other stuff around the country that we could be.
Well, don't tell Trump, because you know what he does to countries that have got rare earth deposits. He blackmails them for half a trillion quid.
So they're saying, well, we could actually sort ourselves out on that front if we had a bit of savvy investment.
Bit of nous. But have we got a bit of nous? Are we prepared to do it? We haven't built a reservoir for 50 years, have we? So supply chain, before we go down that road, supply chain diversification, having suppliers that aren't necessarily all relying on shipping goods all the way around the world. So that's a lesson that I think maybe people are very quick to forget because they always go eventually to the cheapest supplier, forgetting maybe some of the resilience aspects of it. The other one about remote working is I think a lot of companies now are getting more comfortable with the idea of cloud-based computer systems of some sort, but you've still got a lot of on-premise stuff around the place. So if you were to have a fire or a theft or a flood or even worse, then having all of your software systems physically in a place that is just your office, you haven't got the same security and fire suppression and alarms and backups and all that sort of thing as a proper data center has got.
Yeah.
And yet people still do it. And I was in a company the other day where they were choosing a new system and they were seriously prepared to go for the on-premise one over the cloud-based one. And I was just thinking, where has the risk of that been factored into decision-making? Yeah. And are they just fairly relaxed about it? So all those things really, trying to make it so that your business is very robust.
I wonder on that point, is that just a case of, well, that's how we've always done it?
Yeah.
And how much of that still exists? And I think that's maybe almost the circuit breaker with the whole COVID thing, wasn't it? Was that
it forced us to think differently.
You've got to think differently, and like you said at the start, there is that entropy that exists within a business to settle back down to steady state. This is always,
and yet some things go through almost a one-way door, like the working from home thing. Everyone's got a laptop. They know. In fact, we're just more comfortable now being seen on the screen. In the early days, people weren't comfortable with it. Whereas with supply chains, I think maybe there's a knee-jerk reaction in a time of crisis to resource to something that may be more expensive but is more reliable, or just a dual source. But then very quickly, people say, "No, I've got to get the cost out. And they go back to the cheaper, riskier one again, just because while nothing's going wrong, it works. So, I wonder if on your on-premise argument there, it's what we always have done. It's just easier to keep it that way. What else are we going to do with the server room if we have cloud-based work, cloud-based systems? So I think there's a certain amount of just how do you make sure that your company can keep running, given a whole range of possible scenarios from fire, flood, war, and pandemic and all that sort of thing. So remote working, cloud-based computing, obviously. And then your employees, making sure that they're familiar with that and they can do that. But the other aspect of this that I wanted to touch on was the financial side. And I remember this happened after the financial crisis, 2008, and nobody could get any answers out of the banks. The banks shut up shop, didn't they? And
Yep.
I think it was Basel III increasing the capital adequacy rules on the banks and stuff. But you couldn't get, as a small business certainly, you couldn't get loans. And a number of things have been put in place to help fix that, but not entirely. But companies suddenly started saving a lot more. They increased their reserves so that they didn't need to borrow so much. So they reduced their dividends, payouts to shareholders, and held back on investment. And then, of course, COVID came along, and everybody was caught close to the wind again. And that was only just over 10 years later. And so after that, everybody thought, oh, we've got to be careful again and hold reserves. And they all had their bounce back loans and their continuity loans and their furlough money and all that. And they kept hold of it. And that's a lot of the reason they say why now we've not got the productivity gains, because no one's investing, because they're trying to. But I think that that's gradually wearing off again. I think as the years go by, that's becoming more and more of a distant memory, and people are starting to spend more again. And to some of that, you have to welcome it, right, if they're going to invest in it.
Yeah.
But if it means that companies are going below what might be a reasonable level for reserves, then maybe it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes sense to have some sort of buffer, doesn't it, in terms of some resilience? Because I don't think we could go through another pandemic with the same level of government support.
I can't see how it would be afforded, no.
If we're to believe our Chancellor,
Rachel.
Ms.
Reeves.
If we're to believe that there's no money left in the kitty and we're already borrowed up to the hilt pretty much.
Well, I'm sure that's what Rishi would have said a month or two before the furlough came out, right?
But then Martin Fagg always used to say that, I think what's the UK worth? Something like 11 trillion or something if you add up all the assets, and we've got 2 trillion of debt or liabilities or whatever it is. So there's plenty of scope there.
Yeah, he was quite relaxed about it.
To give us more money.
But on the other point, I just don't think they would do this again in the same way. No. I mean, how much fraud was there around furlough? All these companies that supposedly had employees all of a sudden got the furloughs and all the bounce back loans that haven't been paid back. So I think they'd be a lot tighter on it. I can only hope, and maybe this is a forlorn hope, but hope that civil servants somewhere have been tasked with coming up with the plan for next time.
No.
Am I that naive?
Well, you would have thought that would have happened the first time round, right?
Yeah, but it'd been a long time.
But it didn't. And I think that's sort of what we're talking about, isn't it? It's been a long time since anything's happened.
Yeah.
Our memories are all getting shorter and shorter in terms of like how far back we look. It's like the myth of COVID, isn't it, or something now? It seems like it's so far away that that could never happen again.
Well, it's the whole lightning strikes twice argument, isn't it?
And all of that. And I think there is a. If you're allocating resources when they're scarce, you'd look at an event, pre-COVID, you'd look at a pandemic that's going to go around well, that's just a film, isn't it? That's not. We don't need to really prepare for that. So all of these things, I think we have this kind of bias for, I don't know what, the not doing things that we probably know we should, but they don't seem like they're gonna
ostrich
happen.
effect, stick your head in the sand, pretend it won't happen.
Yeah.
And yet when you're asked to put together a business continuity plan or a disaster recovery plan, whatever you call it, you tend to go through all the apocryphal scenarios, the classic plane landing on the building or...
Well, we had that whole thing, didn't we, about having a bag in the building with all the stuff in it, grab bag and kind of...
Mobile phone and some high-vis vests.
See, that's proper conspiracy theory. That's a prepper. Business preppers. That's what we could be.
Make sure we've got enough paper.
That could be a title for this episode: How to become a business prepper.
Business prepper, ready for the apocalypse.
But it's, but yeah, I mean, there are certain practical things you can do, and probably should spare.
Well, I think a lot of them we've been forced to do, haven't we? We've learned. I think the point that I thought about in preparing this episode was, whilst you want to make sure that those things stay, be on guard against those other things that a few years ago you definitely did, but are gradually becoming less present in your mind because it's just, well, it hasn't happened again yet, so it'll probably be okay. Or if there was another one, I'm sure they wouldn't shut us all down, or whatever your
or
view
even,
is.
I mean, even if you think back, cast your mind back to COVID, there was a kind of maybe like a hypervigilance around what's happening out there. Environmental scanning of a sort was going on. What are they doing? How do we interpret this? What's on the, what's coming around the corner? And maybe that's we're not in a state of emergency anymore. So you come back down to that level of complacency and just the sun's always going to rise again tomorrow and all of that. Whereas I think maybe it's not a pandemic or even munitions falling on our heads, but just what's AI going to do? There's threats all over for businesses that aren't keeping their eyes on the horizon, over the horizon even, if you can bend light. But those sorts of things, I think, that is what business leaders should be looking at, saying, what does the future look like?
Well, even more mundane problems of not being able to recruit the right skill set. Or
Yeah.
whatever. You know, you might think that's just a normal business, but if that's going to become more and more of a problem because people aren't being prepared with the right skills, or as you say, AI coming along and one of your competitors is using that in a very innovative way,
Yeah.
and it steals a march on you, or that it takes away your demand entirely. You know, maybe whoever it is you're selling to no longer needs your service. Think of those graphic designers these days or copywriters that are already struggling to find work because AI has already taken their work. So I think that brings you to the point that you've got to think about your business model and make sure that that is robust enough against various different challenges. And if you've only got one thing or one stream of things that you do, which if you're only selling to one market in one certain circumstance with a certain type of product, just think, well, anything could happen. You look at your Porter's 5 forces, who are the replacement products, your competitors and all of that. A bit of integration from either a customer or a supplier. You know, all sorts of things could go wrong. So just have a second string to your bow, How do you make sure that you can switch quickly to something else, that quick pivot? And maybe too many businesses get a bit lazy. We see this quite a lot actually in second generation businesses, don't we?
Yeah.
Whereas an entrepreneur is always programmed to be looking for opportunities and is fleet of foot and thinking about different things to do at the same time. When that's inherited by the next generation, they can see a model that's just been proven to work, produces nice returns. So all they do is go in every day, drink the coffee, turn the handle, and it goes again.
Yeah.
Until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's where if you've not got that environment scanning approach like you talk about, where else can we add value, and listening to your customers and who they're talking to.
And it can sound doom and gloom, but there's plenty of opportunity, right? You know,
great, isn't it?
What's the first rule of, who's the big change chappie? Kotler. Philip Kotler. Is it Philip Kotler?
Mm-hmm.
Never waste a crisis. And if you haven't got a crisis...
Who said that first?
If you haven't got a crisis...
wasn't it? Jack Welch said that.
Invent one.
Yeah, create a crisis.
Manufacture a crisis.
Yeah.
If you need to change something.
And as Darwin said, son of our hometown here, it's not the survival of the fittest at all, it's the survival of the most adaptable. So you've got to be able to adapt. So I think there's some of those lessons there. If you get too comfortable with your business model and it seems to be doing really well, beware. Another thing that Roger Martin Fagg said, which is absolutely proven to be true, is you remember in the year after the COVID, there was a bit of a bounce back and everybody had a bumper year. 2022 sort of thing was a really good year. And he said, whatever you do, don't base your 2023 budgets on your 2022 performance. And what did everybody do? Of course, they did exactly that. Yeah. They took the last year and added 10%, and it didn't happen. There was a big sort of fall off because 22/23 was a catch up of 18 months worth of suppressed demand. And now we're sort of just getting through the ripples of the tail end of that, hopefully. So there's certainly something about business models there and making sure that you're robust enough to be able to cope with anything changing. We've already talked about the supply chain dependency, but it's the other end, isn't it? It's what markets are you serving and how. So I think you've got to be careful about that. What other things then? What other things do you think we've maybe learnt from the pandemic? Let's say we didn't have furlough again. Yeah, that was almost to get out of jail free, wasn't it? Just put everything on ice, keep all your employees on 80%, send them home. Imagine if that didn't happen. And all sorts of things can happen, can't they? That furlough only applies at the national level. If something only happened to your company, you're not going to have the equivalent of that.
Well, if you think, what would have happened if there hadn't have been furlough?
Yeah.
You'd have seen mass business failure, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
There are plenty of businesses that are limped along because of COVID, because of furlough. So if you took furlough away from it,
well, would you have seen the failure, or would they have had to come up with emergency legislation that allowed you to cut your labour costs more quickly than the usual notice periods, so that your businesses could cut their costs quickly and stay alive? But then you've got millions and millions of people relying on the state for support, and the government would have had to pay for them anyway, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So at the national level, you can see it. But if it happens to just your company, if you're the one with the flood, the fire, system failure, you ain't going to get that. So how do you make sure that you've got the right responses in place to be able to adjust your cost base quickly? And if you can't, you need the reserves to see you through the transition period and pay everybody accordingly. I think there's something that PLCs have to have, which is a kind of a winding up reserve.
Okay.
So they need to have enough money on the balance sheet that if they decided to wind up, they don't do what a lot of companies do and just go bust and leave their creditors high and dry. They've got to exit properly, pay off all the creditors and do everything else. So there's a bit about that, isn't there? Just being being ready on a number of fronts. You've got to make sure that you can work anywhere else. You've got supply chains that are robust, given whatever. You've thought about financially what's the appropriate level. Didn't you have a stat as well about the number of companies that borrow are more likely to grow or something like that? You had some stat about that?
No, companies that, I think it was from, not Funding Circle, what's the other one? Thin Cats.
Yeah.
One of the chaps from there was saying businesses that use debt finance are 7 times more likely to grow than go bust.
Mm.
And I wonder if that's just because you are, putting your neck on the line by borrowing, aren't you? No borrowing from there is going to
be cheap.
come without personal guarantees and things, is it? Really?
Yeah.
So you've got skin in the game on that, haven't you?
So and maybe that does sharpen the mind. Maybe when you know you've got to be making interest
debt
payments,
repayment, yeah.
and debt repayments, you've got to make sure you're using the money well. But there's something about making sure you don't take the money out in the first place if it takes you below that safe level. That was the point we're trying to make earlier on. And then, the robustness of the business in terms of the business model, supply chain, cloud-based working, flexible working, looking after employees and all that. And then the communication bit, I think, is the other thing that companies had to learn quite quickly. And there was even one of our clients set up an SMS system, didn't they? So that they could blast a message on SMS to all their employees every day.
Yeah.
Well, I bet they've turned it off since, because it's not the sort of thing you normally have in day-to-day operations, is it? But I wonder now how you'd cope with that sort of thing if you needed to communicate to a lot of employees quickly, whether you'd do that. So there you go. We're sort of marking with respect the 5th anniversary of the lockdown back in 2020.
There we go. Seems like a while ago.
Yeah, it does
Was a
seem
while
like
ago.
so, And whether it's another COVID-style event or not, it's more about a call to arms, really, to say as a business owner, just bear in mind stuff can go wrong.
I think we're sailing on some choppy seas, aren't we, at the moment?
Well, the munitions on the factory, on the office thing, does worry me a bit.
Sailing on some choppy seas, so you've got to make sure you're ship-shape.
I thought you were going to try and weave that into your tanks again, but I didn't know you can do that now. You're on the sea.
Tanks and locusts. We could be eating locusts. That's what we're going to...
Well, not if it's only 2%. I think you got to...
Well, no, but, if we haven't got any more food,
How long does it take to grow a locust?
Not very long. There's huge industry around animal, like using insect protein, isn't there? Huge. It's going to be huge. In the next 10 years, we'll all be eating insect burgers rather than steaks.
Okay. That's your challenge for next week then.
Unless you're in the 1% or whatever.
Can you bring us an insect burger or something?
An insect burger.
Biscuit.
It's a big. I think there's going to be a lot of investment in it.
Lab-grown meat?
Well, it's almost like lab-grown meat, isn't it, really? Because you're just getting the protein.
Yeah.
Apparently there's more protein per gram in a locust than there is anything else, apparently. Very protein-rich.
Who knew? See, not only do you learn useful tips for running a company on this podcast, but you're getting your prepper advice, your emergency telephone numbers around the world, and to check your policies for munitions falling on your premises.
Exactly. And don't plug in your heater with to
a Wi-Fi controlled thing that might set fire and you're not insured for it. Whew. I tell you, if anything goes wrong with people who listen to this, then they've only got themselves to blame because we told them,
Exactly. It's like a manual. They'll look back and go, they knew.
They said that.
They knew.
There's a conspiracy theory. I think we've caused it.
We're just ripping it out there gradually under the radar.
Because we've been paid to by the government on the Department of Information for survival.
They spent £1 billion on COVID, didn't they, or something?
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Let's see what reaction we get to this week's episode and what traffic on YouTube like all the others. So that was it, another episode from the SME Growth Podcast produced by Wellmeadow. Hopefully another set of interesting, useful or locust crunching ideas as Richard takes his last bite for owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises. As ever, please share the word of what we're doing with your friends and colleagues. Drop them an email, put a follow or whatever onto one of the podcast platforms. And in the meantime, good luck with your business.